If I begin the battery once again, I will not leave the half-achieved high floor till in her ashes she lies buried. Henry V, Act 3, Scene 3. That was always my favorite piece from Willie, though I played chorus instead of Henry in the '93 Kingwood Community Theater version. Everybody's faking British accents every time, and the director's having me recite all my lines in a drawl. Brilliant concept, actually. When I was speaking, the audience was snapped out of the scene because of my anachronistic dialogue choice. But what does this have to do with the latest kerfluffle that Wizards has gotten itself into? Right now, Hasbro is playing the part of Harfleur, while the community is King Harry about to send his men once more into that breach. Fortunately for all involved, they've got me. Time to fix the whole half-race mess. And again, I'll take payment in the form of cash, bullion, and the Mystara license. My email is in the About section. For those not keeping track of internet drama, Wizards is redoing how half-races work and not 5.5. From Chris Perkins himself, apparently the word half when describing races is racist. That's news to many of my friends whose parents occupy different sections in the Crayon box set. Here's a little secret. Opposites attract. They might not be compatible. You gotta have something in common, but there's often an attraction. Doesn't have to be skin tone. A different accent is more than enough to cause a romantic connection. As my old college paramour once said, no matter who you are someone else's fetish. They've been able to prove her wrong on that point. People who wouldn't give her a sideways glance walking down the street became enamored with her when they learned she was indigenous Australian. People love the exotic. Vive la différence. The reason why we even use race is because of the 800-ton Balrog in the room, J.R.R. Tolkien. In 1940, race and species were interchangeable. Thus, we get the race of elves and dwarves and men. D&D was built on the foundation he laid. A good chunk of the monsters were taken from his works, even if the names were filed off. Orc is not a racist depiction of anybody. It's a creature derived from Tolkien by combining the Etruscan god Orcus, the Italian word for ogre, and the Pict word for pig. If anybody's looking for something to rage about, chill out and bask in the Oxfordian glory that is the patron saint of fantasy fiction. Now, despite what many doom and gloomers are saying, they ain't getting rid of half races. They are instead watering them down into a flavorless mush because we can't have good things. Kind of like grits without salt and pepper. You pick the traits of one race, the appearance of another, average out the lifespan between the two, and suddenly you got a new half race. Quick, simple, easy, boring. They are removing half-elves and half-orcs as specific named races, which is what got people all riled up. That and calling the word half when used to describe heritage as inherently racist got some hackles up, especially from the people of mixed race who found this news a bit surprising. Here's a little tip. People use the designator half when in a culture or society dominated by another ethnicity, and it will change if they go to another area where the other side of their heritage is dominant. You might be half Asian in Kentucky, but if you go on vacation in Bhutan, you're now half white. You get to pick if you go into a nation that's predominantly anything else. Some regions hold a grudge or a prejudice against specific skin colors, so you might want to identify as the least offending skin tone, but that's just a suggestion. There's nothing wrong at all about being mixed race. Nothing wrong at all. Quite a few proud parents will express all sorts of displeasure if you insult their child over the color of their skin. Claiming something is racist without asking the people of that particular culture, identity, or ethnicity ain't cool. Don't be offended for somebody else. There are a lot of things that might be offensive in your culture, but aren't in theirs. During Steve Irwin's funeral, he was called a bastard no less than 5 times by different people, including once by the Prime Minister. In most cultures, that's an insult. In Australia, that's a term of affection, depending on what adjective you attach to it. Why do I keep talking about Australians? I still got cassowary on the brain, I guess. Wizards can't win for losing lately, but fortunately I'm here to bail them out. Not because I have any respect for their game design decisions, but because I can't stand by while people flail around making mistakes when the solution is pretty obvious. They should know this, but my invitation to their meet and greet got lost in the mail. I do need to stop fixing their problems for free. Half races have always been a staple of fantasy and science fiction. The story of someone torn between two worlds is timeless, and it's easier to write when you can make up the other culture on the fly. Lord of the Rings did it with Eldarion Elessar and his 2 sisters. Tanis Half-Elven was the classic D&D half-elf. But there's countless examples in TV and movies as well. Spock was half Vulcan, Princess Daisy was half fungus, Peter Quill was half planet, Hera Agathon was half toaster, and Chad was half hillbilly. If you need a quick story, talk about them dealing with the culture they weren't raised in. The current half-race version is boring. You're an elf that looks human. No slightly human features, no obvious traits that tell people there's something off about your character. You're just a human that has all the racial abilities of an elf and no other indications. That's the racial rules for mixed races in Mystara. That's great in Mystara because it treats mixed ancestry like a recessive gene. It makes for hilarious misunderstandings in the maternity ward when the Thaisian mother gives birth to a Viala elf. But that's hardwired into Mystara. We don't have half elves or half orcs. We do have a background that explains precisely why we don't. But Greyhawk has them, Dragonlance has them, and so does the Remembered Realms. They even have a nation run by half-elves. If nothing else, include the half-elf and half-orc as separate entities because they serve as examples for the hybrid races. Half-elves are one of the most popular races in D&D. This was reflected in WOTC's own surveys. They got the results back, and half-elves were in the top tier of the races played. And their responses was apparently, "Thanks, I hate it." It's easy to see in the game world why half-elves are so popular. Elves look at our rounded ears, higher constitution scores, bonus feats, and extra skills, and those elf nipples can suddenly cut diamonds. Half-orcs are a little more complicated because despite the heavy PR job they got in 5th edition, most people see them as rampaging brutes trying to burn down civilization. They aren't even in many settings like Birthright, Dark Sun, or Dragonlance. Mystara orcs are a different species from humans and demi-humans. Despite their appearance, they can't interbreed with non-humanoids, similar to hares and rabbits. For people watching this video who haven't binged my entire Mystara playlist, first, shame on you, go watch it now. And second, in Mystara, humanoid refers to the descendants of the beastman race rather than the creature type. It's like a racial subtype. Elves, dwarves, and hen get the demi-human subtype. Orcs, goblins, hobgoblins, and their ilk get the beastman subtype. And the two subtypes can't intermingle. The biggest problem with orcs is they're still largely villains. Violent brutes who entertain themselves with wanton cruelty, displays of savagery, and rampant debauchery. Despite the new fluff about them admiring strength and learning to coexist with all the squishy, weak, defenseless humans nearby, half-orcs are still created in many campaigns through aggressive involuntary poking about. That leaves you with either a weakling raised by orcs or a brute raised by humans. Cue the story arcs. That leads to the discussion for not ruining other settings by forcing non-existent races in them because otherwise players might complain. I've done a video on this and haven't budged an inch since then. If you don't like half races, say the races can't interbreed. Elves and humans aren't different ethnicities, they have radically different lifespans. You can narrow it down and restrict to who can do the nasty with whom. If you don't want half dragons, remind the horny bard first, no dragon is going to put out for some lesser creature. Second, reptilians and mammals can't interbreed. And third, that dragon outweighs him about 300 to 1. If he persists, hand him a new character sheet. But you're here for me to tell you how to fix the half-race problem for WOTC. They've already coined the term, children of different humanoid kinds, or Korach. That's a bit hard to pronounce for anybody not a Klingon. Back me up on this one, Galron. It still leads to the vanilla mix and match race that reminds me of the old flip toy for making new outfits than tracing over them to make paper dolls. It's rather wordy, sounds like it was designed by committee rather than actual writer or game design, and it's rather sterile. So it's got to go. First, break down the races into those with human ancestors and those that are a mix of two different species other than human. Since human is the baseline culture in every single D&D setting that isn't Council of Worms, this half-race gets its own rules. We treat the human side as a template, which takes up the sub-race section of your other race. If it's a race with no sub-race options, the bonus trait overwrites your 4th racial ability, and you get a +1 to charisma, replacing the other race's +1 ability that you'd get from a sub-race choice. The template is called the Human Ancestry Lineage Feature, or HALF. When you select your race, just put that acronym in front of the word, and it's all good. The HALF template gives your character +1 charisma and 2 skill proficiencies of your choice. If you want to be part of a subrace and keep the HALF designation, that subrace is just a cosmetic choice. So an HALF drow still has dark skin but loses the positive and negative subclass abilities. What if you want to build a race that's not an HALF elf but has a parent that's another race? Then apply the heterogeneous atypical linear family template, or HALFs for short. It's about the same spelling. That must be a coincidence. This acts similarly to the human ancestral lineage feature, but has a few differences. Again, it replaces the subrace ability of one parent, only this time with the first ability of the second parent's racial abilities. If this would duplicate a racial trait from the first parent, use the second trait instead, and so on. If both parents share all 3 primary racial traits, then they're actually the same species and somebody was lying on their Tinder profile. The +1 stat increase is filled by the secondary parent's primary stat increase, so an HALF elf with a dwarven parent gets a +1 constitution as their subrace bonus. If this gives a starting stat increase of +3, Instead, just give them a +1 from any other stat. If the race has no sub-races, swap the 4th ability like you would with the human ancestral lineage feature. If that results in a duplication, again, switch the 3rd trait as usual. See, wasn't that easy? Nobody got offended, nobody's been insulted, because you're all adults playing a game. Mechanically, you aren't changing much. The HALF orc stays relatively the same if they have a human parent, while a different parent will give a few bonuses, but not that many. This requires you to ignore Tasha's free floating stat bonus, which is a good thing because floating bonuses make for very cookie-cutter characters. There will be abuses. Naturally, you can't have a mix-and-match system with thousands of possibilities without somebody figuring out some broken combo and exploiting it. You'll need to keep an eye out for people power gaming the system and use the DM veto. Despite what the books say, you're the DM. Your job is to make the game fun. If one player is wrecking everybody else's fun, tap the DM screen. If they persist, their character can always discover an unknown seafood allergy, and maybe the next character will be a little bit better designed. I'm not the fastest at writing videos like this. That's because I had it beaten to my skull that accuracy trumps speed. Plus, I like to include something positive in my videos. Sure, you can constantly rail about what people did wrong all the time, but if that's all you do, people are going to get real tired of that shtick real quick. If you don't like what's happening in the hobby, why are you in the hobby? I can moan about how much I hate these travel shows where people eat food in other countries, or I can change the channel. Or I can go out, find a place I like, and eat there despite them. I highly recommend Jorge's Haggis Hacienda, Hans Haggis Hut, Hans's Haggis House, International Haggis, Nothing Bunt Haggis, and my favorite, Crazy Angus's Szechuan Palace, located in Little Scotland, across the street from the Nepalese Seafood Emporium. And Wizards, if you want to talk to people about how to do your game, you might want to invite some of us that have been doing it for a while.